I'm Diane Sare, and I think you can hear my dog, unfortunately, in the background. He knows that too. I'm an independent candidate for US Senate in New York, challenging Chuck Schumer in the 2022 elections. We have really an extraordinary group of people, I think, this evening to speak to you. And I just want to say a few words about where we stand in the world, because we have actually a very dangerous situation, which I'm afraid many Americans are not aware of. Namely, that the Biden administration seems determined to put us on a collision course with major nuclear superpowers, namely Russia and China. He just announced a state of emergency over so-called Russian hacking, which has never been proven. And we are provoking China on the question of Taiwan, Russia on the question of Ukraine. It's extremely dangerous. And we're imposing sanctions on many countries. Now the situation in Syria is exceedingly dire, where 90% of the population of Syria is below the poverty level. 12 million people in that nation are threatened with death by starvation. And in Yemen, which has been bombed by Saudi Arabia for several years now with weapons from the United States, you have 400,000 children who will die of starvation this year if nothing is done. So part of the reason I launched this campaign against Chuck Schumer is that the United States has to play a role for good in the world. And people say, well, we can only take care of other people if we take care of America first. Well, I think what you'll see, and you'll hear it from some of our speakers tonight, is that in true Christian form, if you take the book of Matthew, do unto others as you would have done unto you, we are doing to others what we are doing to ourselves. We are destroying our own population in many ways, and we are destroying populations overseas. And it is not a contradiction. If we do good for people overseas, we will discover that we are doing good for the American people, because we cannot mobilize what is required to address the situations in these countries unless we create a literate, skilled, compassionate population in the United States. So I don't see these as separate at all. And Senator Schumer has supported every one of the sanctions against these nations. He's been part of the Russia bashing campaign in the US Senate. It's a terrible problem. Now, I'd like to say, regarding the situation here, which we're going to hear something about, I think most people in the United States are well aware that we have horrifically disintegrating infrastructure. If you drive in the New York metropolitan area, you can lose your entire car in a pothole practically. We have 114,000 homeless students in the New York City Public Schools pre-COVID. It's hard to know what that situation is today. We have a pandemic which has led to the death of over 500,000 Americans. And part of this is that we have had a takedown of our healthcare delivery system. So everyone is debating about how it's going to be paid for when you have parts of the country that don't even have hospitals, and hospitals that cannot function on the way that they need to. We have blackouts in places like Texas. We have food shortages and hunger in this country. And we need a crash program like what FDR did. And I had hoped to show, it'll be some other time. Hold on one second. Just gonna, sorry about that. But if you look at the kind of things that Franklin Roosevelt was doing when he came into office, there's a beautiful short little documentary, I think it's about 8 minutes, on FDR in New York City. And he was building east and west highways, building railroads, creating recreational centers and parks, and he was doing it all simultaneously. And what struck me is If we were doing any one of these projects at one time, we would think it was a big deal. He was doing them all at once. What's the workforce that's required to do this? Where are we going to find them? Who is going to train them? How can we prepare ourselves to actually do what's necessary? So that's what I want to say just as an introduction. And I would like to say, while everyone's on, just to be very clear, because the people on with me tonight who I'll introduce are Shawanna Vaughn, who is the founder of Silent Cry Inc., which is advocating for addressing the prison post-traumatic stress syndrome. And she has a lot to say about the situation in the prison. She is working in at least 4 or 5 states right now. She's going to speak immediately following me. We have Kevin Boyd, who is has been active in the prison writers group, which is extremely important for people who are incarcerated. We have Carmine Datello, who is a retired training director for the cement and concrete workers. Dennis Speed, who is my co-moderator of the LaRouche Manhattan Project. And I will just say that people who come on this symposium represent various organizations, 501c3s, that do not endorse candidates. People's participation does not indicate that they endorse my candidacy. I do not necessarily agree with everything that they are presenting, but we are doing this because unfortunately, in this day and age, there is such a censorship and stifling of debate that there are many things that people are not even aware of. And if we're going to come together to solve these problems, we should at least have an idea of what it is we're dealing with. So that's what I would like to say. And Shawanna, thank you so much for being here this evening. And why don't you go ahead?
Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody on the panel. I look forward to hearing from you guys as well. My name is Shawanna Vaughn, and I run an organization called Silent Cry. And right now, my biggest push is policy and legislation. And so, with the help of my really good friend Pamela, the legislation out of my prison diary. Formerly incarcerated, and the legislation is called Post-Traumatic Prison Disorder, Shawanna W76337. And so the legislation is in New York State, Michigan, and I'm working on Alabama.
Excuse me, Shawanna, just real quick, are you connected through headphones? Do you have a headset, or it just sounds kind of muddy right now, the sound?
Okay. Is that better?
A little bit better. There's nothing blocking your microphone, is there?
No, nothing's blocking the microphone. Okay, is that better now?
Sounds a little clearer to me, yeah.
Okay. So the legislation is asking that upon incarceration, 14 days within incarceration, that you be assessed by a trauma-informed therapist. I have specifically in this legislation asked for vendor therapy because we're clear that mental health workers and doctors and anybody else in prison are not qualified to be there. They are the rejects from the outside world who have lost all their credentials and now they're in prison. So I've asked for vendor therapy. So we know that we're getting quality therapists who are coming in to treat humans with humanity. And I'm asking that guards be mandated to therapy. It reduces harm. We're clear that in this country, police and prison guards have the highest domestic violence.
Yeah, hold on. It just sounds muddy again. I'm getting feedback here from some of the viewers that it's a lot of echo right now, and it just sounds really muddled.
So sorry. Is that better?
Slightly better again, but I'm not sure. It might just revert back to how it was.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what is making this happen. But the legislation is asking that guards be mandated to therapy, that people leave with Medicaid, and they leave with a psychosocial evaluation upon release, and they leave knowing that they're going to a therapist with a plan, and that a therapist on the outside has been picked out, and that they're not going to be in lack of either medication or a therapy and a road to healing. And that is what I'm most concerned about. Being that I'm formerly incarcerated and I spent 5 years in the correctional system in California, I'm very clear of the detriment and the mental health factors that come from incarceration. I'm very clear of the fact that we're traumatized before we ever get to prison. And because of that trauma, it leads to prison. And we live in a society that's punitive. We sentence bad behavior, but we never get to the root cause. And so I am aiming to get to the root cause so recidivism decreases. And I think that if we're going to try to fix anything, it has to start with mental health. It is the number one factor. Earlier today, we were talking about women in Rosie's on Rikers Island, and that 90% of the women have mental health issues that are not being dealt with. And so this is a problem. And this is not just a prison problem. This is a community, this is a state, this is a United States problem. We've now cut and closed mental health facilities, and we've put everybody in prison. The mental health facility is prison. Poverty is prison. Drug addiction, prison. First of all, everybody doesn't belong in prison. And if we would restructure our money correctly, everybody would be where they're supposed to be, getting the treatments that everybody needs to get. But that's not what we're doing. We're doing profit over people all the way around. And so this one drop in the bucket piece of legislation is a way to address the minimum, but I think it's vital, along with a lot of other things that need to be encompassed and done within the criminal justice system. But this is just one of them, and this is my fight. This is what I believe that is going to make change drastically. And so this is what I'm fighting for. Post-traumatic prison disorder, Shawanna W76337. And I'm asking for everybody's support. And you know, everybody doesn't have to agree. You can agree to disagree. But the reality is, people who are incarcerated are coming home, and nobody knows who their neighbors are going to be. How do you want your neighbor to come home? That choice is up to you. When we talk about how much money we spend, they ask me, you know, how much is it to fix somebody? Well, how much is it to incarcerate them? How much is the tax on the people that they are victimizing because they are mentally ill, hurt, and endangering society? So if you add up the cost, I would rather see that we are going toward a holistic society and a therapeutic way to heal. And this is the road that I'm on. This is my roadmap for justice, is to address mental health, which never gets addressed when we're talking about prison reform, re-entry. It's never the top of the conversation, yet it is the top of the problems that lead to prison. So this is my fight. I'm Shawanna Vaughn. My organization is Silent Cry Inc. Please look me up. The legislation should be given out. It should be posted soon. We have it. I don't know if you can drop it in the chat or not, but the legislation is there for the Senate and the Assembly. And, you know, tell your legislators to sign on that this is needed in your community, and that you want your neighbors to return well. These are people's children. These are people's families, and everybody deserves to be whole. So thank you very much.
Great. I'm sure we'll have questions for you in the discussion period, and more that you may want to say about that. Maybe we should go to Kevin Boyd. I hope you were able to hear Sean. He may have some things to fill that out. So why don't you go ahead? And I understand you have some kind of image for the writers, prison writers, that you wanted to show. I don't know if Jose has that, but
Yeah,
just tell.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So basically, I was incarcerated for 25 years, 2 weeks and 5 days. I was released last year. And during the time in prison, you know, you always kind of look for different outlets for expression and different outlets to remind you that there is something out there other than prison. And prison writers was something I became involved with. My cellmate actually had it was just a flyer that they said, hey, you know, submit your writing. And I always tried to look for something more to do than just the prison norm stuff. So I did a couple pieces, got published, and you know, it was a creative outlet that was necessary in a pretty uncreative world. But that's that side of it. I was a juvenile lifer, and I was given life without parole at 17. Only through blind, stupid luck did the U.S. Supreme Court decide in a couple cases, Miller versus Alabama being the paramount one, that we would get a second chance. And I'm one of the very few lucky ones that actually got the second chance. And as you can see, I'm no longer incarcerated.
Great. Thanks. Well, I just, Carmine, you hearing from these two may give you some ideas and some thoughts about what you have done. I will say, and I think Dennis probably also has more, that I think one aspect of the mental health crisis that our nation is facing is this collapse that we've experienced over the last 60 years, where we don't produce. FDR used to talk about people having a right to the dignity and satisfaction of productive labor, of being able to know that you're contributing something. You can work 40 hours a week, get a decent pay, leave a legacy, something you built, a bridge, a this or a that, and that it gives you a sense of what you're contributing for future generations. When you rob a society of that pride, of that ability to contribute, then frankly, it's depressing, because you say, what are we here for? What's the purpose of my life? My particular life, if I'm lucky, I'll be 70 or 80, or I'll be 90 or 100 years old, but what's going to remain after I'm gone? And what was that all about anyway? And I think there is some potential, but we sure have a fight ahead. So Carmine, maybe you have some thoughts on what you do and what you've seen.
Well, I was a concrete worker myself for 38 years, and then I became a training and apprentice director for 12 years. And during that 12 years, I met a number of people. We had to follow Department of Labor guidelines. So if someone came and applied for our program and they were in prison, we couldn't ask them if they were in prison. More than likely, they would eventually tell us, because we would all become friends. But these guys, they were great. They became very productive workers. They became foremen. They bought homes. It was just a very rewarding 12 years I had working with a lot of these people. Most of my recruits were like 70% were minorities, and they were just great people, and I loved working with all of them. I had a great time, and I still keep in contact with a lot of them. So.
Well, I think one of the things that happens in our society is that people get stuck in a certain, part of the reason for the American Revolution is in Europe, you could never get out of the caste system. You had to do what your father did, what your grandfather did, what before that. And one of the reasons for getting over here was that people could actually totally change the course of their life, so that you didn't have, if your parents were serfs, you didn't have to have that as a future. And I think one of the things you had said to me earlier was that people, you just kind of alluded to it, but some person coming out of a horrifically difficult situation is now able to have a totally different lot in life.
Exactly. It makes them feel somewhat important in what they're doing. And it was just a great program. And I enjoyed it. They enjoyed it. We became a really good brotherhood with a lot of the people. And the problem, though, in New York today, in the city, is there's a lot of work, a lot of construction work going on. And my union, we have a great apprentice program, just like the electricians or the plumbers or bricklayers. We're in that category. We have a training center in Long Island City, Astoria. And in the process, when they apply, one of the requirements is they need a high school diploma. And then we interview them, and then they do an agility test. And we rate them. And if they qualify, we bring them into the program. If they're not qualified, they will fail. They will go out of the program. So most, we have a good percentage rate that was successful in the program. And but today in New York, like I was starting to say, we have a lot of non-union and a lot of people working that don't have benefits, health benefits, pensions, none of that. And that's hurting the unions. We're losing a lot of our work because of that. And these are great people in the non-union sector. And somebody should do something to try to help them.
Great. Well, I'd like to open it up. Dennis, Speed, if you have anything, go ahead. And also people just feel free to jump in if there's something you want to respond to.
Yeah, I have several questions, actually. Mr. Detello, I wanted to start with you first because you were just making a point about non-unionized labor in New York. There's another thing I'd like you to let people know, what do you do? What is your, when you're doing training and apprentice work, what are you required to do? And when you're getting people to come in, what are you looking for in someone that you're going to take through that training?
Well, we have Department of Labor guidelines, and we have to do a certain amount of hours of training, and they graduate in different levels, okay? First year apprentice, second year apprentice, third year, and so on. And once they get to the final stage, they become a journeyman. And in the meantime, they go out on jobs and they work just like a journeyman. And they work very hard. And sometimes when I was a training director, if I seen a particular guy that was extremely excellent in the work that he was doing, I would automatically talk to the Department of Labor representative that we had that oversees our program, and I would advance him to a journeyman in a lot of cases that try to help that person because they had families and children,
I have a very particular kind of question because I grew up in a place called Chester, Pennsylvania, and that was a place where there were a lot of people in parts assembly, chemical firms, shipyards. People worked. All right, they knew how to work. They knew how to build their own houses. They knew how to do electrical wiring. They'd have a guy next door who was a plumber, and he'd teach them how to do a little bit of plumbing, that kind of a thing. And of course, today there's not even a place for an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old to enter into any of that kind of work, or there are very few places. I'd like you to say something to us about just what it means. You say a concrete worker or cement worker. I want to make sure people even have a concept of what they do. Tell us.
What a concrete worker does?
Yeah, literally.
Well, number one, we pour concrete on high-rise buildings in Manhattan. We do the erection of the decks. We do the stripping after the concrete is poured. We do the erection of the cranes, assembling the cranes to put them together. We do the signaling of the cranes. There's a lot involved,
Right. And so this is a skill because you mentioned levels of apprenticeship.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So tell us something just about what, because here's what I'm about to ask, because we're going to get to how people like Mr. Boyd and others, right, who may have spent some time in jail. And you already referenced, you have people who have been incarcerated that are working with you. These guys are coming out and they want to, they actually want to change their lives. Right. And so just something about what goes into, the mentality, the change in mentality, that you are able to help an individual with.
One of the things that I found to be really effective was bringing everyone together as a brotherhood and helping them. I would go out on jobs and watch them work. And when they came to class, I would report to them what I seen and what I think they need to do to change, or I would talk to the foremans, I would talk to the stewards, or whatever I needed to do to help these people. To get to where they had to get.
Mr. Boyd, I want to go to you for a minute and just ask you a couple of questions. So you're in what's called the Writers Project, right?
Yeah, prison writers.
Yes, prison writers. Okay, great. So now, could you tell us a little bit about why you think you were changed by that experience, and also a little bit about some other people who went through that? Because, of course, when we're talking about a new workforce, people talk about, oh, people are in jail, right? No, they did something. Like you, right? You're in for a life, basically, and then you get out. So, oh, that guy could be dangerous, right? So I want people to understand a bit about who you are, the people that you met in jail, what this Prison Writers Project did for you, right? And why, when you're, if a person like you meets Mr. Datello, that is not just an asset, but it's an actual potential for thousands of people even that could be entering our workforce.
Well, I mean, anytime you talk about a single program, you're talking about a feather in a cap. And that cap is an effort to rewrite your personal history. So in order to do that, you have to, of course, take the first steps, and that's to look at yourself, your own behaviors, and accept responsibility for your actions and the things that have done. So obviously a 17-year-old kid, which was what I was when I went in, I'm now 43. I'm not that person. And my experience with prison writers was that of expression that you really don't get, expression that is vented to, the outside world. That's probably what was the most important thing, was that hearing feedback from prison writers that I received from Lo and Kelly, who runs it, was always important to me. And I ended up making really good friends out in the free world because of prison writers. One in particular, who is one of my best friends to this day, it reminds you that there's a world, there's a society out there that is lacking you. And so it makes you say, okay, I want to get back out to that. Well, how do I take the steps to get to that? Going back to other points, there's certain mental health issues, obviously, that need to be addressed, clearly, no doubt, in the system. But there are also people in there that really just need that chance. A lot of times you say, oh, this guy just got out of prison. He was doing life. He could be dangerous. Anybody could be dangerous. At the end of the day, everybody that is in prison today was a part of society at one point. So just because they may not have, been in prison at that point didn't make them any different than who they were. People are who they are, and they make choices to be who they are. If that's the person you choose to be, fine. But you can't just instantly say this, because that's not the case. And I tell you what, some of the best people I've ever met in my life will never be released from prison.
Now, Ms. Vaughn, just because we were having some problems before your sound, but I have several things for you. Before we began today, Suzanne told me a bit about you and told me you were born in prison. I'd like you to just let people have some understanding of what that even means.
So I always say to people, we talk about slavery, right? And for African Americans, we say, oh, 400 years ago. And I always beg to differ. And people will ask me why. I said, because I was born in slavery. I was born to a mother shackled and chained. And I said, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. Because I'm darn sure that she wanted better for me than what was afforded and given to her. And so I was born April 15th, 1978 in Corona State Prison for Women before the First Step Act, when women were shackled and chained giving birth. And so for me, they say trauma, I was born in trauma and then to the foster care system. And then at 17, I went to prison myself at Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California. And so I don't think that we even equate birth and trauma. I don't even think we put them in the same sentence. And we should not negate it. And if they say you visit the place of your birth, well, I did. But not, I just believe that, the foster care system is a breeding ground and a feeding tool for prison. And so, with all those things, absolutely, being born in prison is an interesting term when you read your birth certificate.
Now, and again, well, let me just say to everybody that's listening, I know some people are having a problem with the audio, but like we'll do some subtitles on this, okay, afterwards, so that everybody can hear. I heard you very clearly, okay, because I'm listening. Now, I want you to say a little bit about the legislation you're interested in making sure it gets across.
The legislation I am working like my third child to get passed is called post-traumatic prison disorder. And so I don't have post-traumatic stress disorder. I've never been to the military. I won't get the benefits of the military services for that label. And so I'm actually working with a trauma-informed therapist. Her name is Dr. Coraline Hunt Griffin, and she works for the UN, and she's a human industrial psychologist, to actually get this in the DSM-5, which takes a very long time and a lot of research and a lot of doctors saying, yes, this is it. And so I want the benefits that come from being disabled and mentally affected from prison. It's not the same. And so I have a gentleman that I'm really good friends with here, and his name is Todd. And he's the first person in New York State to be permanently and totally disabled from solitary confinement. And I use him as a person who champions my legislation because he said there's nobody that is snatched out of your normal habitat into an abnormal setting and you are nothing mentally is adverse. That's just not even possible. And nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to commit murder or I'm going to just be a bad human. Like trauma happens. And this is why I said people are traumatized before they ever get to prison. That's how they get to prison. And we deal with the fruit, but we never deal with the root of trauma. And this is what I'm aiming to do with post-traumatic prison disorder, is actually deal with the trauma of prison, what it causes, what the effects are, and that if left untreated, it leads to recidivism. And it leads to, interpersonal bad relationships. It leads to all type of things. But if we can start to treat trauma in the beginning, then by the time it is time to go home, and like Mr. Boyd said, some people are not going home. But I don't believe just because you're incarcerated that you don't deserve to be mentally free. Because to be free is to be free indeed. And so everybody deserves to be mentally well. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you are. I believe in redemption through optic lenses, and redemption cannot be for some, it has to be for all. And this is why I am pushing this legislation. This is why I believe it is vital. And you've watched people in COVID say, oh, I feel like I'm in prison when they had to stay home. And at first I got offended. And then I said, you know what? Because everybody is in a prison in their own mind. And I had to say, oh, okay, so you're in a personal prison. Oh, okay. And then I don't know how you ever did it.
I just wanted to say, I'm so glad you said that, Shawanna, because I kept thinking to myself, everyone's saying, oh, the lockdown is the same as being in prison. I felt like saying, well, why don't you talk to someone who's actually been in prison before you say that?
Absolutely. You know, Mr. Boyd, I know you'll agree, like, you're in prison? No, you're not. You're not cooking food with your trash can and a trash bag. You're not with 7 other people in your room. No, you are fine. You're okay.
No, prison is COVID restrictions while you're in prison. Try that.
Exactly.
Yeah, people are going to take a while to wrap their mind around what you just said. I think what I'll do now, Diane, is a few things. We're getting questions in, but also
Good.
I'd like to
go ahead.
Well, I know you want to respond.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that struck me, you know, I had read a few months ago about the situation in this New Jersey Women's Correctional Facility, Anna Mahan Center, where, I mean, it's just hideous, these women, and it seems like it's a culture of abuse where the guards, there are male guards who want to use these women for their pleasure. And if they don't go along, they're tear gassed, they're beaten, and everybody sort of covers up for each other in this. And I know from also what you told me that if you're going to come out and talk about the conditions of the prison, they won't let you out because they don't want it to be known. And I was just thinking of this perpetuation of this kind of corruption, because unfortunately, part of the problem, perhaps not to the same degree, but in some cases it is to the same degree. If you think about human trafficking and the drug trade and gangs and so on, we have an extremely corrupt system outside. The entire congressional system right now is based on a kind of organized crime. It's, does the FBI have blackmail material on you? Are you going to be called names? We know that from what happened to Lyndon LaRouche, who people know spent 5 years in prison on completely trumped up charges. And you know, so people don't get ahead, because what struck me reading some of the prison writings, I read the stuff from the site, is that actually, unless you're an extremely remarkable person in some of these prison situations, you will not survive unless you somehow fit into this system, or you will survive by doing something rather remarkable and creative to deal with it. And then I was reflecting on, and I'll link these together in a minute, what you told me, Carmine, and you just mentioned the immigrants, the people who are either in this country illegally or for whatever reason in a desperate situation, they're not in a union. And what happens? These big corporations can save a lot of money by not having to pay unemployment compensation, health insurance, insurance for this or that. They don't have to give people pensions, right? So these corporations are literally making a killing by grinding people up. And they were doing this in the farm sector as well. We heard about this from some farmers, where when they had COVID hitting all the meat packing plants, you remember, they couldn't get a workforce, and they would bring people in and stick them in a hotel somewhere and bus them back and forth, rather than trying to find or create a workforce that would be paid a decent wage. In other words, they're grinding down the population making everyone compete for the lowest common denominator for a short-term gain for some rich guy at the top. But what happens to and the way LaRouche would look at this as the planet as a whole, is your capability to produce is being degraded. Because every time you ratchet something down, it's not just that local situation, you're causing other people to compete with that degraded situation. And it gets worse and worse and worse. Whereas if you reversed it, if you said, no, we are going to unionize the immigrants, the so-called illegals, which a person being illegal is an absurd idea, but the people who are here illegally are going to have a pathway to become citizens who pay taxes, who have health insurance, who are part of and that means they're going to be paid a decent wage, which means that everyone will have to be paid a decent wage. We're not going to make the unions compete with people who are working under desperate conditions, right? So that you raise the entire standard for everybody. And then lo and behold, what do you see? I bet you anything, if people are well educated, have health care and decent living situations, the quality of what they produce will improve.
Absolutely.
Right. And that means the quality of everything improves. And somehow, I mentioned this shift in the 60s, we became so degraded. We got confused. We're coming up here on Earth Day. We got brainwashed. Human beings are animals. Oh no, human beings are worse than animals. You know, and I've heard people say this, animals don't kill each other. I said, well, have you ever seen a National Geographic special? Did you ever watch a cat play with a mouse? We are not animals. We are human beings. And a human society expects that the next generation is going to have a higher standard of living than the previous generation. People who immigrated to the United States, what did they say? I'm going to work my rear end off because I want my child to become a doctor or a classical pianist or a whatever, right? And we had that idea that it was not just possible, that you could take it for granted. Now people take for granted that their children and grandchildren are going to live worse than they do, and it's going to be harder, and your whole family's going to have to move back in with you if you have a place to live at all. It's just, so I think we are dealing with an entire culture, but the interesting thing is when you get a foothold and you change direction or you have a mission, the culture will follow. That is, the culture will also change. And I don't think it is hopeless or long. The rebuilding is going to be long-term because we're such a wreck. It's going to take a generation or two to fix our infrastructure and do things. But the psychology of it will be quick. The change of knowing that you have something good to look forward to, as opposed to knowing you have hell to look forward to. That's all. And I'm sorry, I hogged a lot of time, but this just is provoking a lot of thoughts in my mind.
You were right on target.
Yeah, and you're the person running for office, so you know that's good. I have a couple of things that have been there are a lot of questions, and actually, we're gonna let I guess Jose's got a question he wants to take, but I want to say something, put something out as an idea to people. If you look at it, there are about 7 million people either in the prison system or have been in the prison system, they're on parole, whatever, probation, or are going into the prison system or are related to reform school if they're the juvenile side. Then you look at the people who have been in military or retired from military. And here's the thing I'm about to pose. What if we were looking at the following situation? We got not just COVID, but Diane mentioned highways falling down, all kinds of things we can talk about. There's all kinds of work that needs to be done in the country. And you had a situation where there were an actual, remember, we just took $14 trillion. Who knows what? I mean, that's a lot of money, right? If you start talking about taking anything like even 10% of that money, 1.5 trillion, let's just say. And I'd like to pose this to you. Suppose we were talking about taking persons, particularly nonviolent offenders first, right? Because that's the easiest category. and attaching them to unions in which you've got apprentice and training programs, but they're going to be unionized. And the concept here is that if say you have a 3-year period, taking this a figure out of the air, right? Assuming you have a sentence, let's say, of 7+ years or 5+ years, 3 years probation, person has come out, or the person is deployed into this kind of a program. You work out the arrangement. And that if, in fact, that person in a kind of a halfway house thing succeeds to go through the program, whatever the apprentice and training program is, an employment program, in which, by the way, I think they should be paid some sort of minimum wage, which wage goes home. You know, like when they used to do that with the Civilian Conservation Corps way back 80 years ago, they did it that way. And what you then do is you take people, even if they're violent offenders, and there's another kind of program for them. For example, you have some programs we're going to need to be doing in certain parts of the country, even in places like Panama, let's say right at the borders of Mexico and US. There's transportation programs, there's high-speed rail programs. There's a lot of stuff that you could have as the potential for what you could be doing with this workforce. And I mentioned the military because if you had a way, for example, with young people, to take some of the guys from the military, the guys who've just come out as veterans, you got the people who are juveniles, and you work through some form of, it's not that they're in the military, but it's like Army Corps of Engineers. And you had, in other words, this concept that we were going to take the 7+ million people who are in one way or the other involved in the system. Apart from, let's say, a core, there may be a hardcore. We may talk about that in a little bit, but I'm talking about the obvious. You had a crash program to unionize, apprentice, and actually employ these people because you have plenty of work to be done. The work is needed, whether it's in housing, it's in the water system of our country is all messed up. And I just like to get a response in the course of the next minutes, not just right now necessarily, but I'm put that out there. And Mr. Datello or Ms. Vaughn or Mr. Boyd, however you want to respond to that, please do. Jose, I guess you say you have a question. So maybe now that I've put that idea out there, why don't you go ahead with your question, and maybe people will let that percolate in their mind as you ask your question. And then I've got a few that came in.
Okay, yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. You may have met me before we started. I'm the engineer for the stream. My name's Jose Vega. I want to actually start this by saying that this principle of uplifting people and inspiring people by taking something ugly and replacing it with something beautiful in people's minds and hearts is something that is universal. There is someone named Alma Deutscher. Now she's, I think, a teenager now. She's 13 or 14 years old. And I bring her up because she is a classical musical composer, a classical musician who also composes operas. And she did something where she took these sounds of police sirens and she turned them into a waltz, into these beautiful melodies because she liked it. So she is somebody who could actually understand taking something ugly and making it beautiful just as much as anybody else on this call and anybody on the planet. So that's the preamble to my basically comment, which is that in El Salvador, and I posed this to all of you before we started the stream, but in El Salvador, what the president of El Salvador, which was one of the most brutal countries in the world, which spawned one of the most dangerous gangs in the world, MS-13, what they just did, they closed down 3 prisons, and they're replacing them with cultural and educational institutes. That makes a total of 4 prisons they've shut down since 2019 to now, and that they're replacing with cultural and educational institutes. They are taking something ugly and they are replacing it with something beautiful. So I just want to know what your thoughts are on that. Do you think that that's the right approach to solving the problems in the system that exists today? Not just in okay, yeah, go ahead. No.
Oh, absolutely amazing. I do work with people in Venezuela and other places, and we talk in the criminal justice system. And I think that America is behind the 8 ball with therapeutic, holistic ways to heal. We are a capitalist society who thrives on slavery, and prison is the extension that we don't want to let go of because the 3% at the top don't want to be broke. And I absolutely think that that is the right way to go. I think that we need to have a total transformation of what prison looks like and what punitive looks like and what restoration looks like. And kudos to a country that America looks down on to take the lead in showing people what transformation really looks like. Taking away 4 prisons is not a small thing. That is huge. And to know that you're making a cultural educational center, which is going to help many young people and the masses, I think kudos. And how about America take a page out of that book?
My battery's getting low. I got to go plug in. Hang on a second.
Okay, yeah, fine. Mr. Ditello, any thoughts on either what Jose said or what was brought up before?
You're muted.
I think
Carmine.
you're muted. Carmine, you're muted. You're muted. Can you unmute your microphone?
Okay, I got power now. Sorry, guys.
Okay, great. So hold on. Carmine, can you unmute? Otherwise, we'll go to Kevin.
Uh-oh.
I guess he's doing some place to check it out. So Kevin, you had any thoughts about what we were just talking about?
Well, no doubt this is, I mean, the situation in and of itself is a little bit beyond complex. So there is no one right fix for any of this. I think probably one of the most important things that we need to do is we need to make sure that we do not create the idea that there is an enemy at all points at every angle, because viewpoints don't create friends and enemies. Viewpoints should create conversation. And I think that more times than not, if you can find a positive solution, present it in the proper way, then we can then say, okay, look, we all agree there's a problem with prison. I don't think there's a person in this country, from Schumer to McConnell to Trump to Biden, I don't care who it is, there's not a person in this country that says it's fine. So, okay, that being said, instead of everybody fighting about it, everybody contribute one positive idea. One positive idea. Mental health, it's been brought up. There's an issue there. Okay, get behind the legislation she's pitching. Look at it, read it, take the time to inform yourself about what it is that's really going on. Because one of the craziest things I've known is that after 25 years of incarceration, when I was locked up, everybody had a phone in their house that had a cord attached to it. Now everybody has a supercomputer in their hand and nobody talks on it. So do we not communicate? Do we not, do we just leave 2 million people sit? Like you said, there's an idea. We have an infrastructure problem. Well, there's 2 million sets of hands. There's a guy right there willing to train them. What are we talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Why talk? Act.
Yeah, exactly.
The training that I received in prison in the past year has provided me a living. And now I'm a business owner. So it can be done. I did it. And I think that that's the right way. Because if I had not received that training, I wouldn't be talking to you right now.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's a pretty pertinent point when you're talking about, okay, well, how can we fix the system? There's training, there's hurdles, there is PTSD. They can stigmatize it all they want to, say, oh, that's just for military veterans. Yeah, okay. Okay. I can say that because I live it. I can say that you can survive after prison because I've done it. You can be successful after 2.5 decades because I do it every single day. So, when we talk about these things, you have two different parties. I think it's great we're hearing from new parties, more parties, because it takes away from this way or that way. I think they fight now just for the fact that they want to fight. And there's just been so much stigma and so much bad blood that you maybe can't fix any of that. So let's start hearing from some new people. Whether you disagree with them, you agree with them, or you don't, we have to hear new ideas for old problems because the old problems haven't gone away. They're still here.
Right. And the old ideas are not working. So that's for sure.
Old ideas are not even ideas anymore.
Yeah, Mr. Ditello, did you have anything? We couldn't hear you.
There's a lot of problems. There's prison problems. There's military problems. My union is like a small part, very small part of all these problems. We have helmets to hard hats, a program for military guys when they come out. We try to help them, bring them in. We speed them in to our unions if they're willing to come. And it's, like I said, it's just a small part. But if there's a lot of problems and we have to all work together to try to make things happen, to help this country be better.
Very good. So Diane,
as a country.
Go ahead.
As a country.
Yeah, as a country. Very good. Diane, I think we have, okay, the Shawanna put the legislation in the chat. I'm just going to try to read it off here. It says the bill is in the Senate, I guess, S4872. We can make this available to everybody through the chat, just reading it off so people can hear it. The lead sponsor is Senator Brian Benjamin. And in the Assembly, A06144, lead sponsor is Kimberly Jean-Pierre, okay, from Assembly District 11. Just wanted to read that off. So those are the numbers for the bills, and you can get that from us otherwise afterwards. Now, there were some questions that came in from Alabama, from Erica, and I'm going to just read these off. And, anybody can respond. I guess we'll just ask each individual. All right, so here's some of the questions. Reverend James Bevel, he was an old civil rights leader, passed away back in 2008, worked together with Martin Luther King, particularly in Birmingham, Alabama, back in 1963. Reverend James Bevel described our neighborhoods as, quote, an asylum without walls. What do you think he meant? And then the next one is, what things need to be changed legislatively and culturally to reduce the amount of adverse childhood events experienced by our children? I guess there's an actual name, adverse childhood events, or ACEs. And then 3, what are effective non-pharmaceutical therapies to address mental health issues? So I think what I'll do is just leave the 3 questions. I'll repeat them, and I'll ask each person, if you have something to say, you can skip it, you can take one, or you can take none of them, whatever you want to do. So again, Reverend James Bevel described our neighborhoods, I guess he's about, particularly but not just Black, but also poor neighborhoods, as asylums without walls. What do you think he meant? What things need to be changed legislatively and culturally to reduce the amount of adverse childhood events experienced, I think with respect to prison and children. And then the final thing was, what are effective non-pharmaceutical therapies to address mental health issues? So again, take any one of those or pass if you wish. Kevin, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Carmine and then to Shawanna.
Well, I mean, you're talking, we talked earlier, and I think going back to the childhood thing here, we talked earlier about, people needing to belong. And so you see the gears going of society and stuff like that. And I think a lot of times back, if you look really far back, you see, there was a baker and he contributed to a society, and there really wasn't a lot of currency exchange. It was a trade, but he was a necessary component of his community, and that he was needed. the mason, he built the shelters, the farmers, they brought in the produce. These were necessary components of a community. And so people have to feel necessary, in a community. That's why everybody feels good when they go to a ball game or they go to a church or they go to a concert and they're all doing things together. And I think that's really what we're missing all the time. You got 7 billion people in the world and everybody's alone. And if you really think about that there's a lot to be said. So if people have that community again, whether we ever get it or not, I don't know. But I think that would alleviate a lot of childhood stuff. I would have loved when I was a kid to be part of a community to where I could have reached out to anybody and said, hey, I'm having these problems at home. And maybe that would have turned something. And as adults, we have to care enough to be those people.
Okay. Mr. Ditello, anything?
No, I'm going to pass on Adam.
Okay, very good. Shawanna?
I'm definitely not passing on those 3 questions. So I can only answer from a Black woman in a Black community. We live like the military. Don't ask, don't tell. We live in a trauma community. And when she said the asylum and the without walls, absolutely. We will sit with the child molester at the funeral and the family reunion, and we know he's there. All the baggage. We live like the military. Don't ask, don't tell. Everything that stays in the house is for the house. Everything in the community is in the community. Well, we're a sick, not well community. And I am death on raising children and the next generations after me to say, if it hurts, say ouch and tell everybody until somebody hears your cry. Because I can't speak for Kevin. I don't know what his community was growing up, but I know my community, we're generations and 400 years in sickness. We're 400 years in trauma. We are rooted in pain, disparity, and hurt. And until somebody is willing to say, we're going to unpack our suitcase, and not just with our own dirty laundry too. And we're going to say, no longer is this acceptable. And we need to heal in totality as community, as individuals. We're not going to be well. And my mother was a drug addict because she was raped and left on some railroad tracks. I went to prison because there were some things going on for me. Everybody has trauma. I told my children I went to the cross. I'm unpacking the suitcase. If it hurts, say ouch. I don't even care if it's me. So we have to become those people. Tell until somebody hears. Because silence is complicity. And the asylum walls have to come down, especially in minority communities. And accountability has to play a part in the walls coming down. And I'm a big person on accountability. Guess what? The ACEs, you talked about adverse childhood experiences. Well, guess what? Black, white, orange, or green, everybody had some adverse childhood experiences. It's just, how did we deal with it? How are we taught to deal with it? And so where some people are getting therapy, other people are saying, go pray about it and get over it. And that's not the solution. And so I believe that if we are going to come to a true place of reconstruction in this country with mental health and healing and breaking down the asylum walls that are not there, then we need legislation for us, by us. And this is why I'm teaching people incarcerated to write policy and legislation. I can't write a policy on climate change, not because I don't care about the earth, but just simply I don't give a damn. But guess what? I care about foster care, I care about prison, and I care about gun violence. Those are the things that plague me, my community, and every 90% of the people that I know. So those are the things that I'm going to dig in and give my life to. And I just believe that everybody at the table has to take stake in what your passion is. Like I spoke to Diane, and she was so passionate about energy and radiation and the planet and the earth. And I'm like, oh, wow. And she sold it to me so good that I was like, oh, maybe we should clean up the neighborhood. Oh, because that's how passionate she was in selling why I should believe what she's telling me. And then when I did my own homework and research, I'm like, oh, wow, low dose radiation. Oh, it really has some benefit practices. And I read about where it was used, when it was used, because knowledge is half the battle. Knowing is half the battle. And so I believe that it takes people like Kevin to sit at the table to help write policy and legislation. Kevin just said he's been home less than 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
He has a business. Guess
I've been home a year.
Oh, Kevin's been home a year, and Kevin has a business. So guess what? I would tell anybody coming home, oh, you need to be an entrepreneur. Well, let's go find Kevin, because obviously Kevin got a blueprint, and I don't have a blueprint. I don't have a business. I run a nonprofit, and I just want to stay on the ground and help people and write policy and legislation. Want to write policy and legislation? Come over here to this camp. You want to do business? Go over there to Kevin. You want to be a carpenter and a mason? Go over there to Carmine. You want to learn about how to save the planet? Go talk to Diane. Everybody has something to give the earth. But collectively, if we all sat at a table, like Kevin said, to pick that one thing to write policy and legislation and change the narrative about, then we could dig our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren's children out of all the things that we've seen. That's truly what I believe, that it takes these round tables to come together to make change.
Well, one thing I can tell you is that your audio definitely cleared up. We all heard that clearly. Diane, do you have anything to say about any of these questions?
Yeah, I do. One of the things that I would do, and I actually would do it in the US Senate when I get in, is organize a chorus. As people may or may not know, my quote unquote professional training, whatever that means, is as a musician. And I founded the Schiller Institute NYC Chorus in the wake of the Eric Garner grand jury decision that no crime had been committed after this person was suffocated in police custody for selling single cigarettes, and you knew that there were powers that wanted to rip the country apart, pit the police against minorities, minorities against the police, get everything riled up. And we had to discuss this on a higher level, because if you look at, frankly, who is in the police force, the millionaires and the billionaires are not police officers. They don't have to do that work. So how do you address this? And Dennis and I worked on this. We said, well, we're going to have a sing-along dedicated to the sanctity of every single human life. Every life is sacred. And we did Handel's Messiah. It was pretty rough, but we had about 100 people who showed up on 6 days' notice. And someone said, well, why don't you start a community chorus? And I thought, well, that's a really good idea, because we used to have choruses everywhere in this nation. And one of the things the chorus does, I appreciate, Kevin, really what you said about this question of community or solidarity. The beauty of a musical ensemble is that it doesn't work if it's in unison, that as everybody sings the same part, has the same voice, that the richness of an ensemble is that you have many different voices that come together and they produce something which is infinitely greater than the sum of the parts. And I saw it with the chorus. I actually learned something. I was teaching people how to read music, and I thought, and you can do this exercise. If you have 5 people in a room who don't know anything about music, can't necessarily match pitch, and don't know how to read music, and you're trying to teach them, or you have 50 people in a room who don't know that much about music, which is going to be more difficult to teach, the 5 or the 50? And what I discovered is that if you had 50 people, it was actually easier. You actually got more done. And I think part of it is that inside of our minds, we all know when we don't know what we're doing. That is, if you're trying to figure out how to do something, you have a kind of antenna up. Does this guy know what they're doing? You're kind of listening and then sitting back and trying to take from all the parts where it seems like someone knows what they're doing. And what I found is in the larger groups, that quality came in. So someone might excel at this, someone might excel at that, and everyone wanted to do it. So they were taking in the best of everyone. And in the chorus, what I found, many of, we don't audition people. No one has to audition to get in the chorus. And people stay, we don't throw people out of the chorus either. We might ask people to sing a little softer at this part or that part, but what you find is that it's amazing that you have something from the group as a whole, which is so beautiful and so beyond what any of us individually thought we were capable of producing. So I think we have to reintroduce classical music. We have to have music programs in the schools from an early age. It's one of the first things that's taken out. And also this thing about the phones. People are very isolated. They're isolated while they're with other people. They go to a restaurant, everyone's sitting there on their phone. They're sitting at a table with each other and they're all looking at their text messages. So people actually, odd as it may sound, we have to retrain ourselves how to have a human relationship with another person. And music can help you do that because you're both contributing something to a whole. So that's just one of the things. And I seriously, if I get in the US Senate, I'm organizing a chorus. These people, I don't care what their background is or, whatever, they're going to be in this chorus. And we're going to perform beautiful music for the people of the United States. That would be a good contribution for these people.
Well, one thing I think, Diane, about what you just said, of course, you mentioned that we had formed this group in New York. We actually got to be rather large, several hundred people performing, and also about, I think, over between 1,000 and 2,000 people that went through it. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So actually, that is a real prospect for the immediate, well, near, as soon as we can already get together, immediate future. I guess maybe what the things we should do at this point is see if there are some summary remarks. We're kind of at the end of our time, and maybe what I should just ask is if there's anything that any of our participants want to convey to people that they haven't said, and we'll kind of bring it to a close. So, Mr. Ditello, let's start with you. Anything that you haven't yet said, or any response you have to what you've heard that you'd like to say something about at this point?
Just that every individual is a person, and they should be respected for who they are, and that's how I feel.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin.
Well, I'm a carpenter by trade, but a musician by passion. So what was just said means a lot to me. And I think a lot of people watching can say, oh, well, that's just kind of, that's just so kind of different. But isn't that good? How cool would that be? If everybody could just knock off the nonsense for a minute and just, okay, let's do this. I think that'd be great. But, going back to a couple of things, prisonwriters.com was a really positive outlet for me in prison. It's a positive outlet for guys that are in there. Read their stories. Don't forget them.
Okay, yeah, we got it up here. Yeah, this is the website and some of the stories up on the website. So people can just get that, prisonwriters.com. And it's showing you what's up there.
Yep. Because those guys are in there. And I drove past the prison the other day, and it seemed so small. And I remember when that place was all I knew, and it was so big, and those guys are still there. And, this is one very small contribution outlet that gives them something to express themselves, and they want people to hear it, and they deserve to be heard.
All right. Thank you very much. So Ms. Shawanna Vaughn, please take the floor.
Absolutely. I want you to go to silentfireinc.org. I want you to look up the legislation. I absolutely want you to call your local elected officials and tell them sign on right now. It is imperative to the way we are treating human beings, and we have to deal with mental health holistically and comprehensively. Not now, but right now. And so I beg to leave you with a question. If not now, then when?
All right. Thank you. So Diane?
Well, first, I really want to thank everybody for participating in this discussion. I'll reiterate for people who came on late that participation in my symposium does not constitute endorsement of my campaign. But we have to have this discussion. I would like to go back to a little bit of what I said at the beginning, because we have a planet that is in crisis, and we have a situation right now of particular urgency in Syria and Yemen of starvation, where children are not going to have the opportunity to do anything. And the Schiller Institute tomorrow is actually, Dennis will be coordinating a discussion at 2:00 in the afternoon, schillerinstitute.com, on this situation with one of the guests, Hussein Askari, who is an Iraqi, now Swedish Iraqi. He fled Iraq during the first Gulf War, was a refugee, and so on. And Harley Schlanger, who people who were with LaRouche may know. So I'd encourage people to tune in tomorrow at 2:00. I appreciate what everybody here has said. And I want to really underscore, as I think Shawanna also said, we are tolerating things in this nation right now that are simply not acceptable. They are not acceptable. And I think every person, we do have to take responsibility ourselves in our own action for what we see. People get very upset about what happens in politics and this and that. If you sat on the sidelines and just complained about it, then you are responsible for it. We are up against a very powerful conglomeration of financial interests. They don't want even governments to be able to act. They want to call the shots, as we know from a meeting at Jackson Hole, Wyoming in 2019, where the bankers said, we want regime change. We don't want any presidents. We're going to destroy the leadership of the United States. We're going to target Russia. We're going to target China. We're going to target the big nations and try and replace them with simply bankers who don't care at all about human life, but just about a profit, and frankly, reducing the human condition. So if we could actually recognize that there are some people who think they are running the show, who actually think about 6 billion of us should be dead, then maybe we could get our act together and unify ourselves to do what mankind should be doing. And I'm actually very optimistic that we are going to be successful. And partly my optimism is born by what we have on this program tonight, what each of you has done, what you have done in spite of adversity and people's action. Most human beings, I think, are good and want to be good. But sometimes we need a little help getting that out of ourselves. And that's what we've got to do. So those are my comments. Please tune in tomorrow too. And that's what I have to say.
And I take it that that is the close of our show. So I'll just say on behalf of Diane Sare and the Friday Dialogue with Diane Sare, and everybody that was on, I really want to thank you all, Carmine Ditello, Keith Boyd, and Shawanna Vaughn, for joining us. I want to thank everybody who participated, both in terms of questions and viewing, and invite everybody to become part of this effort, both the campaign effort and the broader effort to bring this kind of thing to consciousness, and then let people, having heard the truth, decide what actions they will take to set themselves free. So thank you all for being part of this, and we'll see you next week.